Life in the longhouse was centered around the fireplace. There is not a fire right here now, but you can imagine that this would be the center of your existence almost. And people would have slept along the walls. Your life kind of evolved around this house, this longhouse, being the center of your universe actually. You would not travel a lot, and you would see your home and your longhouse as safety in a very uncertain and potentially dangerous world. During the Viking Age, people, they lived in large extended families with their children, maybe their children and wives and so on, and sometimes their children as well. You would have actually also slaves that would be more integrated in, a lot more integrated in your existence and in that large extended family than if you compare it to, you know, the transatlantic slave trade and so on. People depended on each other in a hostile world, you could say. A lot of the year up here in Scandinavia, it's really cold. So you would depend on the fire that we don't have right now, because I don't think that the people at the museum would be happy if I started a fire here in their longhouse. You would also have typically a large pot. You would just add stuff to it. It would be this forever stew, you could say. Instead of frying, because frying you lose a lot of fat and calories. So it's not like in the Hollywood movies. Yeah, I hoped I would not bang my head as I was entering the house, but I did. But during the Viking Age, also the animals sometimes were kept in the longhouse, in typically one half of the longhouse. This longhouse here is more not, well, I don't know. It's more like a workshop area in this part here, as you can see. And you have the sleeping quarters and the fireplace here. Sometimes you would also have people sleeping at the second floor. They would just put boards across here and people would sleep on top there. Another thing about living in a longhouse is that the further you move away from the fire, the colder it gets. And also people would sleep close to each other, especially during winter, to keep warm. So you see these sleeping quarters here, these bunk beds, should I say, they are quite wide, so that people, you know, looks like two people can sleep next to each other here. Because again, you know, the cold would kill you if you were not careful, and especially as you get older. And people during the Viking Age, they did actually get quite old if they were not victims to some kind of accident or violence or something like that. But this idea that they lived until 30 is just rubbish. That's false. That's a myth. They could get quite old. So part of life here in the longhouse, I imagine, would be also to care for the elderly. Not only to care for the children, but also to care for the elderly. The women typically would sit during the evenings with a spindle to make thread, which was, I've heard, I haven't done it myself, but I've heard that it's almost meditative. Also along the wall, I imagine they would have had a loom where the women would make blankets and you know, garments, because that was something they had to work on constantly as clothes they wear out. I think that in a longhouse you were always very close to both birth and death, or should I say life and death. You would have someone being pregnant, maybe someone getting very close to childbirth, and you would also have someone elderly getting close to the end of life. So people lived much closer to the circle of life, if you will. And that was natural to people back then. Stark contrast to how we live our lives today in the so-called modern world, where age groups are separated in our society. So, what do you think? Would you have enjoyed life in a longhouse during the Viking Age? Let me know in the comments what you think. A lot of people would say that life in the Viking Age was brutal and dirty and uncomfortable. And I'm sure it could be all those things, but I also think that it was more honest. And I think that there's a lot that we can learn from the Vikings.